Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Way Wednesdays virtual Midrash. We are in the portion of Yitro tonight. So we're going through the book of Exodus. We're in chapter 18. There's some fantastic stuff, as always, right? So we're going to get into that. If you have any questions, you can certainly put those in the chat. I'll do my best to get to those, but I can't always promise that there's so much good stuff. And I love this passage. I really do. I love this passage, and I think you're going to love it too. Just about everything in God's word is pretty amazing. Maybe there's a few genealogies that get a little bit boring, but otherwise it really is amazing stuff. So let's get into it. Right here we are. All right. And Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, that the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. Then Jethro, or Yitro, Moses' father-in-law, took Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her back. Now, this is a very interesting thing. What's going on with this? I get the impression that there was some tension between Moses and his wife. It's hard to say exactly. Of course, we know that when Moses was going to Egypt, his wife was going, and their two sons, and the sons were not circumcised. And so she then circumcised her boys, and she blamed it on Moses, right? So there was kind of some tension. And then we really don't see about Zipporah except for here. And then for the most part, she's out of the scene. We never really hear what happens to her. And then we hear that Moses takes an Ethiopian or a Cushite wife. So something is going on. That's just the impression that I get. I almost get the sense if he had sent her back to her father's house, it almost sounds like a divorce to me, but I can't be positive of that. But that's what it sounds like to me. So he sent her back with her two sons, of whom the name of one was Gershom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a foreign land. And the name of the other was Eliezer, for he said, the God of my father was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife to Moses in the wilderness, where he was encamped at the mountain of God. Okay, so they're clearly not divorced yet, if indeed my theory is correct, and I could be wrong, but that's the impression that I get later on as things go on. Now he had said to Moses, I, your father-in-law, Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her two sons with her. So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, bowed down and kissed him, and they each asked each other about their well-being, and they went into the tent. And Moses told his father-in-law all about the Lord, all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardships that had come upon them on the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. Then Jethro rejoiced for all the good which the Lord had done for Israel, whom he had delivered out of the hands of the Egyptians. Now remember, Jethro is a priest of Midian, right? So he is familiar, very familiar with Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. In fact, it's very likely that, excuse me, that Moses might have gotten ongoing training from Jethro, right? So obviously he was raised to Hebrew parents, but then he really spent a lot of years in the house of Pharaoh, and so he probably didn't have maybe as deep an understanding of Yehovah as he should have, right? But then he spent 40 years with Jethro, right? So that right there was a lot of his training. We can at least surmise that. And Jethro said, blessed be the Lord who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, and who has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. So clearly we can see here that Jethro is well familiar with Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, with Yehovah. Now, I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods, for in the very thing in which they have behaved proudly, he was above them. You see that? Remember how we talked about how God would execute judgment against all the gods of Egypt, right? This was really a contest between these two gods. And of course, the God of Israel won. He won the battle, hands down, right? No contest, really, if we think about it. There was no contest at the end of the day. But these gods behaved proudly. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and other sacrifices to offer to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. And so it was on the next day that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood before Moses from morning until evening. So when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did for the people, he said, "What is this thing you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit, and all the people stand before you from morning until evening?" And Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people came to inquire of me. When they have a difficulty, they come to me, and I judge between one and another. And I make the statutes of God. I make known the statutes of God and his laws." Now, remember, God has not spoken at Mount Sinai yet. What we hear from so many people in the church typically is that, we're not under the law. What was done at Mount Sinai is not for us. But notice here that Moses already knows the statutes and the laws, right? So here the word hukim and the word Torot. Okay, so Torot are the instructions. God has already given his instructions, and he's given his statutes or his ordinances, right? These things are already known to Moses, and he's communicating them with the people. So Moses' father-in-law said to him, "The thing that you do is not good. Both you and these people who are with you will surely wear yourselves out. For this thing is too much for you. You are not able to perform it by yourself. Listen now to my voice. I will give you counsel, and God will be with you. Stand before God for the people, so that you may bring the difficulties to God. And you shall teach them the statutes and the laws, and show them the way in which they must walk, and the work they must do. Moreover, you shall select from all the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of fifties, and rulers of tens. And let them judge the people at all times. Then it will be that every great matter they shall bring to you, but every small matter they themselves shall judge. So it will be easier for you, for they will bear the burden with you." Now, again, where did they get this knowledge of God's instructions, of God's laws? Well, because God's laws were not something that was new. This is so incredibly important. Let's take a look. Let's go back a little blasting from the past here. We're going to go back to Genesis chapter 25, verse 6. Well, actually 26, verse 5. I often get those mixed up. So 26, 5. Let's see here. 26, 5. All right. So what did Abraham do? God is boasting to Isaac about Abraham. "Because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws." You see here, God's laws, the so-called Old Testament law, as so many people like to talk about it, that was not a new thing. This was something that was already in existence. Because why? What are God's instructions but his values of what he thinks is important or not important, or what he thinks is good or not good, right? As a parent, you're always teaching your children your values. Sometimes you use words, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have to post them on the wall. No fighting, right? No taking the other person's toys, right? Sometimes you got to just state them bluntly. You got to write them down. Other times you would hope that your children would know these things. You're like, "Man, you've been hanging out in my house. Clearly, you know that I'm against, toy thievery." Okay. You can't do that. But again, sometimes the message isn't clear. So God is going to reiterate his instructions for us. That's the beautiful thing, but they ideally should be in our heart, but they're not. Okay. So, and at some point, he's going to then write his instructions on our hearts. All right. So that is going to be really, really awesome. All right. So let's see here. Let me get back to where I was. Okay. So the good idea. Thank you, Jethro. And this is good for any society to have these kinds of things in place. If you do this thing and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure, and all those people will also go to their place in peace. So Moses heeded the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he had said. And Moses chose able men out of all Israel and made them heads over the people, rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of fifties, rulers of tens. So they judged the people at all times. The hard cases they brought to Moses, but they judged every small case for themselves. Then Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went his way to his own land. So, sometimes we can become over spiritual in our worldly dealings, right? And sometimes we're like, oh, I got to pray about this, and God's just going to do this amazing, miraculous, out of the blue kind of thing. But sometimes it's just the, good planning, it's good logistics, right? So we really don't want to discount those things. And sometimes logistics and whatnot are sort of like considered worldly kind of things, but this is not at all worldly. This was very good advice from his father-in-law on how to have a successful nation, right? So, every nation and every household would be wise to learn these things, to put these into practice, right? Now, often for a house of maybe, 3, 4, 5 people, you don't necessarily, need this kind of hierarchy, right? But there still needs to be something in place so that people more or less know where they stand. All right, now this really is one of my favorite passages, Exodus 19. This is such an amazing passage. Why is it so amazing? Because we are going to see God's going to come down, right? We're going to have the voice of a shofar, very similar to what we see in the New Testament. All right, so let's get into it because, again, great stuff. In the 3rd month after the children of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on the same day they came to the wilderness of Sinai. All right, so we're now coming up to the Feast of Pentecost, or Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks. All right, so we've gone 49 days from when God took Israel out of Egypt, 49 days, right? So now they are in the 3rd month, right? It's not after 3 months, but in the 3rd month, right? So this is where we come to. So again, when do we start counting, right? So not from Passover, but we start counting from the Feast of First Fruits, right? So, exactly, it floats, right? The date floats, of course. But if we look at it, this now takes us up to coming into that 3rd month. So again, starting in the middle of the month, and then a little bit past the middle of the month of Nisan or Aviv, right? So that's called the 1st month. And we go 30 days. That puts us, toward the end of the 2nd month. And then we go out a little bit more, and then we are in the 3rd month. Okay. So it's not counting 3 months, but it's in the 3rd month. That's the difference. And that's how we arrive at this time frame. So I'm absolutely convinced that this happened on Shavuot or Pentecost. And of course, what's going to happen? Some 1480 years later, roughly. Well, of course, that is when the Holy Spirit is going to be poured out on the church, right? So this is a big deal. All right. So in the 3rd month, after the children of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on the same day they came to the wilderness of Sinai, for they had departed from Rephidim, had come to the wilderness of Sinai, and camped in the wilderness. So Israel camped there before the mountain. And Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. So God's original intent is that the whole nation should be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, right? Well, we're going to see with the golden calf incident that God is then going to take the Levites for himself instead of the entire nation. He's going to take the Levites, and they are going to be the priests. Now, what we see in the New Testament is we see essentially a reversal of that basic idea. So here in 1 Peter, he says, coming to him as a living stone, rejected indeed by men, but chosen by God and precious, you also as living stones are being built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. All right. So, well, it's not totally taken away. It's just, how should I put it? It's resolved in the New Testament. All right. And And what God had intended originally is then finally going to be done as he had originally intended. It just took a little while. All right. And Moses came and called for the elders of the people and laid them before all these people, all these words which the Lord commanded him. And all the people answered and said together and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. So Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, behold, I come to you in the thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you and believe you forever. So Moses told the words of the people to the Lord. Then the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow and let them wash their clothes. Hey, you're getting ready to see God. You better put on your best. Now, it's not just putting on your Sunday best, as it were, but whenever they would go into the temple, what did they have to do? They had to wash. They had to wash before they went into the temple. Now, part of this is just for basic purification, right? You're dirty, right? Your body smells. And so it's good to clean your body, right? If there's anything beyond that, I'm not entirely sure. But that's a big part of it, is that you have to present yourself clean before the Lord. All right. So let them wash their clothes and let them be ready for the third day. For on the third day, the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. You shall set bounds for the people all around, saying, take heed to yourselves that you do not go up to the mountain or touch its base. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. Not a hand shall touch him, but he shall surely be stoned or shot with an arrow. Whether man or beast, he shall not live. Now, this is interesting, right? So, right, God is saying, look, don't come and touch the mountain. The impression I get here is that if you do this, you are going to be killed, not necessarily by a person, but this person's not going to live. Why? Because there's so much incredible energy that is coming from the Lord, the whole mountain. If we are to believe the reports, which I think are fairly credible, that this was probably in the Arabian Peninsula, not on the so-called Sinai Peninsula, as we often have heard the term. But this is, again, outside of what we think of as the Sinai Peninsula, right? So again, part of this is that areas have changed. So they crossed the Red Sea. Does this put them in smack dab on the peninsula of Sinai, or does this put them on the other side, which could have been considered part of Sinai? It's at least possible. And there you have a mountain, Jabal Musa, which means the mountain of Moses. And it seems to have been burned from the top down. How did that happen? Maybe God showed up. Maybe that's why it's burned. Who knows? But that's certainly an interesting study to take a look at that. Okay, so you're not going to live, right? When the trumpet sounds long, they shall come near the mountain, right? So come near, but don't touch it. Do not touch this thing, because there is so much incredible power. So Moses went down from the mountain to the people and sanctified them, and they washed their clothes. And he said to the people, be ready for the third day, and do not come near your wives. Then it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunderings and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain. And the sound of the trumpet was very loud, so that all the people who were in the camp trembled. And Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Now, Mount Sinai was completely in smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. Its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked greatly. And when the blast of the trumpet sounded long and became louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him by voice. Then the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. And the Lord said to Moses, go down and warn the people, lest they break through to gaze at the Lord, and many of them perish. Now, again, why would they perish? Well, remember what Uzzah did, right? He had the Ark of the Covenant. It was being pulled by oxen, which they weren't supposed to do. They were supposed to have consecrated Levites carrying the Ark of the Covenant, but they didn't do that. So they just had it on the back of a cart being pulled by two oxen. And Uzzah went to steady it when it kind of bumped over a rock. And guess what? He died. Now, why did he die? Was God angry at him? And well, that is what the language is. But I think what's going on there is not just that God was like, oh, I'm so mad. I don't think that was the case. It's just that God is fire. God is electricity. God is energy. And if you don't handle that properly, you will get killed. Does electricity get angry with you if it kills you? No, it's just you did not handle that electricity properly. Let's take a look at a few passages, as this is going to put us into proper perspective. All right, so Daniel has this vision, and he says, I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Wow. Okay. And it's this fire that the beast is going to be thrown into, and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. Where did the flame come from? From God himself. All right. Let's take a look at another passage. This is Ezekiel chapter 1, starting at verse 26. And he says, above the firmament over their heads was the likeness of a throne, an appearance like a sapphire stone, and the likeness of the throne was the likeness with the appearance of a man high above it. Also from the appearance of his waist and upward, I saw as it were the color of amber with the appearance of fire all around within it. Now, this word here, amber, is in the Hebrew chashmal. All right, so chashmal, right? Va'ere ke'ein chashmal. Here's the word right here. So yeah, it does mean amber, but this also is the basic idea of electricity. All right, so amber has some static electricity properties, and the ancients were aware of this, and so it's not only a color. In fact, the word color is not even there, but he looked like it says the eye of chashmal, or the eye of electricity. Right, and so ain can also be ain, or ain can also be the source, right? So the source of electricity is what is going on here, right? God is the source. He is the absolute source of energy, electricity. In fact, when we look at this world, we look at things, the phone, the computer, the microphone, the clothes you're wearing, you, right? You get right down to it, and we discover that inside those atoms, we have things called electrons and protons and neutrons. But then we get deeper into those, and we find quarks, and then we find muons and gluons and other things. And then we get down to this Higgs boson, which is some kind of just a little packet of energy, and it's moving in something called the boson field, and it's the friction that gives anything mass. That's how we understand these things. But we get down to this little packet of energy. Well, what is that energy? We don't know. We don't actually know. But the Bible gives us some very important clues that this energy actually came from God. And there are people that understand that the universe is actually information. And we're like, well, that's right. You've finally gotten back to what God said in the beginning. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, right? And what did God do in the beginning? He spoke, and worlds came into existence, right? So it was through the articulation of words from God that this energy was then given form. It was manifested into something of a physical substance that we understand it today. But when we get right down to the very nitty gritty, to the smallest of particles, there's like nothing there. And it's just energy. And the energy is based on information. All right. So here God is going to show up on top of Mount Sinai. This is a monumental event, right? And of course, the people are afraid, because here's God, and there's this fire, and there's smoke, and there's electricity, right? But also, what else? What did we see? That there was a trumpet blast. The blast of the trumpet sounded long and became louder and louder, and Moses spoke, and God answered him by voice. Okay, so what's going on? Well, something pretty astounding, right? Now, where do we find the trumpet? Well, we're going to find that trumpet in some very important places here. Let's go to Revelation chapter 1. All right, Revelation chapter 1. Here, John is on the island of Patmos because of his testimony. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, that's the Sabbath, and I heard behind me a loud voice as of a trumpet. So, what was this voice? It was a voice or sound. It was a sound of a trumpet, but it also had articulation of words. But the quality of this voice was a trumpeting sound. Now, I don't entirely know how to imagine that, but it was pretty incredible. So the Lord's voice is a trumpeting sound. Now we see also this in Matthew 24, that Jesus is going to send out his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, right? So he will send out his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together. So when he sends them out, he's going to say, go. And when he says go, or whatever he says, that command to go is going to be a trumpeting quality voice, just like at Mount Sinai. Where else do we find this? Well, of course, at 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout and with the voice of an archangel and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Okay, so now there's, of course, been a fair amount of debate. Is the angel going to speak or is it God? Well, what we just saw in Matthew tells us that Jesus says that his voice is going to have that trumpeting sound. Right. So what I would suggest is that when he speaks, it is something akin to the voice of an archangel, and it has a trumpeting quality, the trumpet of God. So you put them all together. Jesus will give a command to go out and get his elect, and that voice, that sound from his voice will be very trumpet-like, or trumpeting, whatever you want to call it, and that will be the command to go and to get his elect. Ooh, right. That is some pretty exciting stuff. So, so we can see here that this voice is talking about the Lord's voice, right? And that's exactly what we see back here in Exodus, right? So then the Lord came down, right? And the Lord said, be careful, don't let them perish. And also let the priests who come near the Lord consecrate themselves, lest the Lord break out against them. Now, notice, God, it's not that God is like, I'm going to get you guys. No, it's just that God is this gigantic ball of energy. He's the source of electricity. And he's like, don't get too close, man. Don't get too close. That's why we put up signs by power stations. Danger, right? High voltage. If you get too close, you might die. And, we understand that now. Well, understand that God is the source of electricity. And if you touch him in this body that's decaying and falling apart, it will kill you. Just ask Uzzah, right? He learned the hard way, sadly, because, didn't follow protocol. And it's not that God is angry or ticked off or mad at you. It's just you touched a live wire, and what did you expect? If you touch a live wire, you will get shocked. But Moses said to the Lord, the people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you warned us, saying, set bounds around the mountain and consecrate it. And the Lord said to him, away, get down, and then come up, you and Aaron with you. But do not let the priests and the people break through to come up to the Lord, lest he break out against them. So we know how they're going to die. They will die because they'll get zapped. That's what God is trying to warn them against, right? God is trying to protect the people from who? From himself. He's trying to protect the people from himself. And I mean, that's amazing, right? That God is kind of put himself in quarantine in a temple for our benefit, not for his benefit. God is not in a temple because he can't handle us. He's in a temple because we can't handle him. That's why he's in a temple, right? He's not just there to be secretive and I can't talk to you guys. He had the whole temple system in place for a long time because he desperately wanted to be with his people. But in his form, who he is, and in our fallen state, the two of us are rather, well, we can't hang out too well. We are very incompatible with one another because of our fallen nature. And God wants to be with us. So he made a way so that it's a stopgap measure. It's a temporary measure that he is going, and what he did, of course, replace that with the sacrifice of Jesus. And then we get new bodies, right? So we're not done yet. We're going to get new bodies, and that will be, oh, that's going to be so good. All right, now we come to the 10 words or the 10 commandments. These are not new ideas. As we already saw, these were being communicated, taught, lived well before God spoke them here. We saw as far back as Abraham that he already had those things. And we don't even get a place where God's like, okay, Abraham, sit down. I'm going to tell you my stuff. He seemed to just know them as well. And really the implication then is that Adam and Eve knew those also. Okay. And God spoke all these words saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. Right. All right. So I am the Lord your God. I'm the one who did this. Right. So don't have any other gods, because why would you have any other gods? Well, those other gods are going to promise you things. They're going to say, hey, come on over here. We've got a great deal for you. Just give me your soul and you can have all this fun. Right. These other gods will suck you dry to the bone. But the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob wants to give, and then he wants to give some more because he loves you and cares about you. The other gods are fraudsters, scammers, and yeah, they will steal everything you have. In this day of online purchases and online everything, it is so easy to get scammed, and the scammers are very sophisticated. So you've got to be very, very careful, right? But it's nothing new in a sense, right? Back then, those gods were sophisticated and they had a shiny package and it sounded like a great deal. And so people bought it, but then they were in debt, right? Everything was taken from them. Whereas God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob wants to give to you. He wants to give and bless you beyond your ability to even receive it if you'll just open your mouth. So no other gods. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or anything that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments. All right. Well, this is good news, right? So don't make any graven images and all that. Why? Because I am a jealous God. I'm a jealous or zealous God. What does it mean to be jealous? Let's say you're jealous for your children. What does that mean? It means I want what is good for them. I don't want any harm to come to them. If there's somebody hanging around my kids and I'm like, this guy, I don't trust him. I'm very suspicious of him. I'm going to intervene because I'm jealous for my children. Okay. Now, we often think about the jealous husband and he doesn't let his wife go out of doors because, that's a very different kind of jealousy, one that is trying to repress somebody, one that is not secure in himself. And so he's making these terrible obligations that she has to keep. That's not what we're talking about here. God is not jealous of us, but he's jealous for us. He wants the best for us. And so he is going to take steps to ensure that we get those things. Now, he does let us drift away if we choose to do that, right? But he will not have any rivals because those rivals are nothing. And the good news here is that he shows mercy to thousands, to those who love me and to keep his commandments, he says. So keep his commandments. His commandments are good. They are for you. They're not against you. They're absolutely for your good. And I've been, I keep thinking about, like, why do I need to keep God's commandments? Because when I don't, those actions that I participate in are destructive to me, right? It's like, when we see don't touch, high voltage, it's dangerous. It's destructive to me if I touch that. If I put my hand too close to open machinery, guess what? I might not have a hand anymore. That's why there are those instructions. There are these signs. Listen, you got to do it this way. If you don't, you might lose a leg. You might lose a hand. You might lose your head if you don't follow the instructions. It's funny that we can understand this for on-the-job training, and we can understand that somebody is now without a hand or without a foot because something happened at work. Somehow, somebody, some way, did not follow the rules or the proper protocol, and they paid dearly for that screw up. But when God tells us, like, oh, he's trying to take away my freedom. No, he's trying to keep you safe so that you're not killed and you're not maimed, because that's no fun, right? So do what the Lord says to do. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Now, I think this is actually the so-called blasphemy of the Holy Spirit, that when the Pharisees were attributing the power and the work of God to the work of the devil, they were truly taking his name in vain. Unlike any other time in human history, they were taking his name in vain. And notice, he will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Now, I grew up hearing that you should not say, GD, right? Or, say, oh, Jesus, right? Something like that sometimes people do. And I think that's good. I think it's wise. And I do not use those. However, I don't think those words by themselves are necessarily taking God's vain, or should I say that's not the entirety of what it means to take God's name in vain. Taking God's name in vain is so much more. It involves not respecting the name. You, as an ambassador of Yeshua, of Christ, you are to comport yourself in such a way that you're going to bring glory and honor to him rather than the other way, right? So we can take his name in vain in a number of ways, and we want to be very careful that we don't fall into that. All right. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Now, Zechor et Yom HaShabbat LeKadsho. Right. So I just want to read that in Hebrew. Not trying to show off, but I wanted you to hear that in Hebrew, because we often hear, if you are someone who is keeping Torah, or you're Messianic or Hebrew roots, or whatever term and flavor you want to use, we often hear from our other Christian brothers that, oh, it doesn't matter, every day is the same. Well, look, I do think that, days off, just any day off, is very important, but it's not the Sabbath, right? The Sabbath is the Sabbath. Okay. How do I know that? Well, it's really quite simple. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 2. Okay. And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had done. Okay, now right here again, Vayechal Elohim beyom hashvi'i. That's the seventh. Melachto asher asa vayishbot. See this word right here, vayishbot. This word right here, and he ceased. Yishbot is from the root shin bet taf. Do you know what other word is made up of shin bet taf? Shabbat, right? Or Sabbath. And what day was that? It was the seventh day. The seventh day is when God ceased or rested, right? He rested from his labors. Now, God wasn't tired, right? So he didn't have to get a breather. Okay, I'm not going anywhere till I get a breather. That wasn't it at all. This was God's like, okay, I did all my work. Now I'm setting up a day of rest or cessation, relaxation. Now, there's a lot of confusion about what you can and cannot do on this day, but let's let God tell us. But the seventh day, the Sabbath of the Lord your God, in it you shall do no work. Okay. Who? Well, who can't do any work? Well, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger, who's within your gates. Okay. So the cattle, that's interesting. Well, let's kind of start from there. The cattle get the day off, right? So you can't make them be pulling at the mill on that day. They get a day off. That's quite generous. What a great boss, right? Now, can the cattle go out and eat? Of course they can. They can go out and munch on the grass all they want. Okay, so eating, of course, is not something that you cannot do. You're like, why are you talking about this, Doug? Because sometimes we go to these extremes about this day that was gifted. It was gifted to us, and we make it in something that is a burden. And this is what I often hear from people who don't have an appreciation for Torah. They think that this is a terrible thing, and thankfully God sent Jesus to free us from this terrible thing, when God is the one who gave us these things. And it took me many years to fully understand how this is a gift and not a burden. But now I see it. Okay. So, and sometimes people come and ask me, Doug, what can I do on the Sabbath? And I say, listen, I'm not the one who can tell you what to do on the Sabbath. Well, can I mow my lawn? Well, maybe, but maybe not, right? So again, what we're not supposed to do is we're not supposed to work, right? We're not supposed to work. Now, the word here for work is malacha, okay? Malacha. Now, that's the same word that we saw in Genesis chapter 2, that God ended all of his work and he rested, right? So his work, what was he doing? Well, he's being very creative. I mean, like massively creative, like creation creative, right? He was, making the heavens and the earth. He made light. He separated light from the darkness, right? He separated the waters above from the waters below. He brought the dry land together. He made shrubs and trees and grass appear, everything that had seed in it. Then he made the sun, moon, and stars. He was being creative, right? He was speaking these things into existence. And he was being very, very creative. Then he made the fish and he made all the birds. And then on day 6, he made all the animals and he made man. Very, very creative. Now, he wasn't tired, but he was creative. And on the 7th day, guess what he did? He did not create. He did not create anything. He did not cause the initiation of something new. He did not bring about new things on the 7th day. All right. So that was a time of, rest and relaxation. I don't know how else to put it. So what are we allowed to do? Well, are we allowed to heal people on the 7th day? Yes. Jesus clearly showed us. In fact, if you want to know the ultimate example, the walking, living, breathing example of what it means and looks like to keep the Sabbath, look at Jesus. Jesus had no problem with keeping the Sabbath, but it was the Pharisees who had trouble with Jesus doing certain actions on the Sabbath, such as healing people. And Jesus made it very clear that to give someone rest from their infirmity on the Sabbath day is one of the greatest things you can possibly do. All right. So very good. So, if you're a doctor, if you're a fireman, a paramedic, thank you for going to work any day of the week. I really appreciate that. All right. Because we need those people. Now, that means there's also support staff. It's not just the doctors that show up, the doctors and nurses, and then you need the guy that turns the lights on to keep that hospital operating. You need the guy that cleans the toilets, right? So, a hospital is one of those things where it's hard. You just can't shut it down because accidents happen every day of the week. And Jesus showed us that it's good to heal people, right? If your donkey falls into a ditch on the 7th day, go and get that thing out. Okay. Now, most of us don't have donkeys nowadays or cattle in that sense. But we have other things. And so, if you have an issue or your friend has an issue, a donkey-like kind of issue, by all means, go and help that person. right? So sometimes people have made it so restrictive, or they say, well, we have to do it the way that the Orthodox Jews do it. Well, that's not true, right? I very much appreciate the Orthodox Jews. I've learned a lot from them, but I don't agree on all of their interpretations and practices on the Sabbath. For example, there's this thing called an elevator. What does an elevator do? It saves me work. So instead of me having to walk up 10 flights of stairs or 20, 50, 100 flights of stairs, guess what? There's this machine that I can just hit a button and it comes down to me automatically, right? The machine isn't thinking, it just has a computer in it and it says, oh, somebody needs a lift from floor 1 up to floor 92. And it goes down. I hit button number 2. It takes me up and it opens the doors. It's all automatic. It's computerized. There's no person there sitting hitting the button. It's just done for me. All right. And yet somehow in some of the Jewish traditional thinking, I'm not allowed to hit a button. I don't think that's work at all. I think the work is the machine doing it. I'm just telling it what I want to do. Now, maybe in the future, when all of our elevators have artificial intelligence, or they have, Hello Google, or they have Siri or whatever, and I say, take me to the 92nd floor, and I can just tell it, and I won't have to hit a button, and the machine will just even do the thinking for me, right? But currently, they're not able to do that, and I'm just hitting a button. I don't think that's work at all. There's nothing creative about hitting a button to take me up to the 92nd floor. And yet, sometimes people who start to keep Torah, or people who are against Torah, think that, oh, we've got to follow it that way, and that's why I'm doing it, or that's why I'm not doing it. But I think they're both wrong. I think there's so much freedom in keeping the Sabbath. Remember, this was something that God created as a gift to me. He didn't create me for the sake of the Sabbath. He created the Sabbath for my sake, right? So this thing is a gift to me. All right. So I have incredible freedom. Now, can I mow my lawn? Well, again, it depends. If you do lawn mowing for a job, that's your vocation, you probably really shouldn't do lawn mowing on that day, because it's going to feel a whole lot like your occupation. However, if you're a guy that sits all week, and you sit and you sit and you sit, and you're like, oh, I just need to get out. I need to move my body. I don't know. Maybe mowing your lawn might be the greatest thing you could possibly do. But here would be my exhortation to you. Be careful, because it's very easy to fill up our Sabbath day with all kinds of housework types of chores, right? And it seems so easy and like, oh, this is really great. But, maybe that first, second, third time you're mowing the lawn on the Sabbath, it feels very relaxing. But then after a while, it could become something that, oh no, it's Saturday, I have to mow the lawn. And if it gets to that point, you probably should stop and say, you know what? I'm not going to do this. Some years ago, I was visiting some family in Europe, and it was Saturday, and the lawn wasn't mowed, and they were having a party. And I thought, they asked me if I would do it, and I thought, this is the question that I often throw out to people, or people ask me. And I had to think about it for a second, but I thought, you know what? This is something similar to getting a ditch, or a donkey out of the ditch. All right. So that's how I understood it. That's how I was thinking about it. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to do good for somebody today. They didn't pay me. Right. I actually enjoyed it. So it wasn't hard work, and the mower did most of the work for me. It was one of those self-propelled mowers. Right. So I just had to stand behind it and just turn the corners. Right. So I was in that place. I thought, you know what? I'm going to do this to bless these people. This is something that I can give, even though it's Sabbath. I don't believe that I'm being creative, or that I'm in any way breaking the Sabbath. But I did have to think about it for a second, right? And I thought, I have the freedom to do this. Am I going to somehow, make God upset if I do this? And I thought, no, I'm not going to. Now, later in the book of Numbers, chapter 15, there's a man who is going to be out on the Sabbath, and he's collecting sticks. And it's such a terrible offense that he is executed. You're like, oh my goodness. Wow, what a backward society that was. That's what people say. And yet it wasn't. Why was he collecting sticks? Let's think this through for a second. Why would you collect sticks in that day and age? Well, to make a fire, of course, right? Well, why would you make a fire? Remember, God was giving the air conditioning and the heat, right? He was a cloud by day, that's for covering you from the sun, and a fire by night, that's keeping you warm at night. So why did he need these things? Well, the only answer could be that he was going to work, right? He was going to do some kind of a professional activity on the Sabbath that required fire. Now, I don't know what he did. Maybe he was a smith. I don't know, right? I have no idea. But a lot of professions require, heat, right? Fire, maybe hot water. Who knows? Maybe he was a tanner, right? So maybe he needed the hot water to do his tanning business. I don't know. But he was somehow doing work. And that was a clear violation when God was right there in his midst. And so this guy wasn't just forgetful, he was rebellious. And so that is why he was executed. But the Sabbath is a gift to us, not a curse. And when we can finally get that through our noggins, oh man, it's going to be good. All right. All right. So why? For in 6 days, the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. There's a blessing on the day called Shabbat. What day is that? The seventh day. Now, is it wrong to go to church on Sunday or Monday and sing songs about Jesus? No, it's not. You can do that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You can do it Sunday, right? You can sing songs about Jesus any day of the week. It's perfectly fine. You can learn about God any day of the week. Open your Bible every day of the week. Open your Bible and learn more about God. There's nothing wrong with doing that, right? So I'm not against Sunday worship. However, if somebody says, well, the Sabbath was changed, that's why I say, wait. I'm fine with you worshiping on Sundays, but let's be clear that the Sabbath, the Shabbat, was not changed. It is on the seventh day. All right, period. There's no debate about that. All right, so now if you are already a Sabbath keeper and you've been really concerned about those Sunday people, I would say give them a break. All right. They probably aren't going to listen to you if you're like, I can't believe you're worshiping on Sundays. You're probably not going to influence them in a good way. But if you do it quietly and you do it faithfully and you have conversations with these people, they will take notice of what you're doing, that you're preaching with your actions instead of condemning with your words. It makes a big difference. All right, so those are the first 4. And the 5th, honor your father and mother, right? So honor both, not just your father. Honor your father. No. Honor your father and your mother, right? So God was clear on that. Both the father and the mother, the man and the woman, deserve your respect as their child. You are obligated to give them respect. Now, do you have to always agree with your parents? No, it doesn't mean they're always right, right? As a father, I'm not always right. As for my parents, they weren't always right. But I still needed to respect them and to honor them, even though if they were wrong, right? That's fine. We can have discussions about it, even boisterous, voluminous discussions about things. But I always needed to respect them, right? And that's what we're being told, right? You can disagree with them, but respect them, honor them in all that you do. The word kaved or kabed here, it's the word for kavod, the same as glory. And it also comes from the word to be weighty, right? So there's something weighty about giving honor, right? So just kind of think that, oh yeah, there's this heaviness. I'm giving something of value, something tangible, substantive to my parents when I'm honoring them. The opposite is to take them lightly, vainly, right? To treat something lightly, vanity, right? And so that's what we don't want to do. I want to give them that respect, that honor, that weight that they deserve. So those are the first 5. Number 5 is, it's hard to say, does that belong in the first 4 with the first 4 or the latter 6? I'm not sure what to say, right? But The basic commandments are love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. All right. So number 5, I don't know. It could go, maybe that's why it's sandwiched in the middle, because it's both loving God and it's loving your neighbor when you honor your father and your mother. Maybe that's the reason. All right. So the next 5 commandments: you shall not murder. Now, this seems really simple. If you love your neighbor, guess what you're not going to do to him? You're not going to murder him. It's really simple stuff, isn't it? Right. So, I say this because I hear people say, oh, the New Testament's all about love. Well, so is the Old Testament. It's all about love. Trust me, when you don't murder somebody, that's a form of love. Okay. Now, it may not be all lovey dovey and romantic kind of stuff, or even, parent to child kind of love. It may even just be, hey, you know what? I'm not even going to talk to you, but at least I'm not murdering you, right? That's a good start, right? That's a baseline for love. That's a good place to start, at least. All right, so let's build up from there, right? Don't kill him, don't murder him. Secondly, if he's married, man, don't steal his wife. If she's married, don't take her from her husband. You're not loving your neighbor if you do either of those actions. I don't know. Again, I think it's self-explanatory, but I feel like, I don't know. Do I have to explain these? Don't steal, right? If you love me, don't take my stuff. You could ask me and I might give it to you, but don't just take a little 5-finger discount, right? If I love you, I'm not going to walk over to your house and say, and just take the car keys and say, see ya. That's not a form of love. Loving my neighbor. I see these things on TikTok or wherever, and people are just going into stores and they're blatantly walking out with stuff, just walking out the front door. They don't care. Now, it was not good before, but now we've gotten to the point where they don't care at all. And I don't know, it's kind of shocking, right? But the point here, don't take your neighbor's stuff. Okay. And you could really say that all of these kind of go back to don't stealing. If you murder, you're stealing someone's life. If you commit adultery, you're stealing somebody's spouse. If you bear false witness against somebody, you're stealing their good reputation. So don't steal. That's maybe one way to just kind of encapsulate that. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, nor anything that is your neighbor's. These sins of the hands and the feet and the tongue, where do they start? Right here in the head. And that's where coveting happens. In my head or in my heart, somewhere between those two, I keep thinking, oh man, why does he get that? Or why does she have that? Or I deserve that. He doesn't deserve that. And that's where it begins. And then that leads to things like bearing false witness. Oh, I can't believe he's got that. Do you know what happened? All right. And then it might lead to stealing or adultery or even murder. Right. So be careful, little head, what you think. Okay. Be careful. Now, all the people witnessed the thunderings, the lightning flashes, and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood far off. Then they said to Moses, you speak with us and we will hear, but let not God speak with us lest we die. And Moses said to the people, do not fear, for God has come to test you, and that his fear may be before you, so that you may not sin. So the people stood afar off, and Moses drew near the thick darkness where God was. Wow. Pretty amazing stuff. Not surprising, right? Okay, just a little bit more here. Then the Lord said to Moses, thus he shall say to the children of Israel, you have seen that I talked with you from heaven. You shall not make anything to be with me, gods of silver, gods of gold, you shall not make for yourselves. An altar of the earth you shall make for me, and you shall sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I record my name, I will come to you, and I will bless you. And if you make me an altar of stone, you shall not build of it hewn stone, for if you use your tool on it, you should have profaned it. Nor shall you go up by steps to my altar, that your nakedness may not be exposed on it. All right. Well, thank you guys again for joining me. So glad that you were here with me. If you could, share these, spread these with people, because I love the Torah, and I think people really need to hear it. They can be blessed from it. So, subscribe, like, and share it with others is a great way to get the word out. I hope you'll join me tomorrow for Prophecy Roundtable, and then, of course, join me on Shabbat for the Shabbat teaching in the book of